All right, it's been a long time coming, but today we are finally talking about the Santa Cruz Heckler 29 versus MX. So Zach and I each took one of each, and we did back-to-back laps, and we swapped bikes halfway through so that we could each get a feel for how each bike, that's a lot of eaches.
Yeah.
So the lap we took had a mix of flat rolling climbs, really steep climbs, really steep descents, loose descents, tight stuff, jumps, berms, corners, pretty much everything you're going to ever encounter on a bike. We really wanted to cover our bases on this track because we felt like the differences between this bike are not going to be huge. It's the same bike.
Yeah, and I really feel like that's kind of key. This is the same bike, but there are differences. The differences are subtle, they're noticeable. I mean, if I'm honest, maybe a less experienced rider or inexperienced rider might not even be able to tell the differences, but they are real and they are there.
So a super quick overview about the Heckler before we dive in. Really, you should just go watch the original review we made, but really quick hits here. It's a 150 mil travel all mountain e-bike. It comes in two different wheel sizes, the 29 or the MX, and the geometry remains mostly the same, and there's no conversion. So that's why you've got to make sure you get the right one in the first place, because you can't buy a kit to go from a 29 to a mullet or the other way around. All right, so now we're going to jump into the ride impressions from our test.
It's a warm Sunday. Zach and I are out on Hecklers, going on a big adventure ride, and we're going to be swapping back and forth. So we can talk about the differences between the full 29 version and the mullet. Right now I'm on the 29, so the gray one. Zach's green one is the mullet. And I'm really curious to see how noticeable it is. I've never ridden, the exact same frame, mullet to not mullet. So Zach and I just had a dumb idea. I don't know if you can see this little zigzag trail. We're gonna go for a high mark climbing challenge. I have a feeling it doesn't go very far. Oh, there it is. Oh man. Yeah, this is silly. Okay, I beat him by like 4 feet. Oh, woo. Neither one of us did very well and we're embarrassed, so we're leaving. Oh boy, we just switched. I've got Zach's now. I am on mullet mode. So one thing Zach and I were talking about, this might not hold any water, but it kind of makes sense, is you've got 85 Newton meters of torque at the chainring. So when you take that same motor, put a smaller wheel on it, you might get better acceleration out of the bike. Zach was kind of pushing the pace for me on the climbs before we switched, so I'm just gonna chalk it up to that. He was on the faster bike. It's definitely not that I'm not as fit as you, because that, definitely could not be the case. Yeah, well, and I went to the gym once last year, so ready. Going down the hill. I have not ridden this trail for a long time. I remember it being steep, fast, narrow, a little sketchy. This is fun. That back end on this bike is easier to move around for sure. Woo! Yeah, I think this back wheel's a little easier to move around. And I felt like the 29 version really wasn't bad. Ooh, this is steep. It's not gonna look all that steep on camera, but this is like can't slow down kind of steep. Zach's gonna need a new set of brake pads on this thing. Woo-hoo-hoo. Okay, so we had too much fun that first lap down. We're gonna come up for another one because we're on e-bikes, so why not? We swapped back to our original bikes again. I don't feel like I'm going out the back so much. It feels like a more centered body position with that longer chainstay and bigger back wheel. And then Zach is pulling away from me again. I'm like having to work to hang. And last time I was kind of half wheeling him the whole time. So there might be something to the smaller back wheel being a little bit faster. All right, round two. Round one was so good, and I'm excited to try it on this bike. So I feel like there's better traction on this bike. That's like a bit apparent actually. And it's more stable, but not quite as easy to like pump and push that back and out into these little corners. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! Oh, my eyes are watering. Yeah, that's real fast. I had a tough time slowing down for this corner on Zach's bike, and that was a lot easier on this bike. That's a mouth closed section of trail. That's how you get Giardia. Oh, and that was a lot easier on this bike for me. Alrighty, folks. That's gonna wrap up the ride section. We're gonna jump back to the garage. We're gonna dive in, try to pull these two bikes apart, see what the differences are, and make our picks.
All right, so when we started out, I was on the MX, Connor was on the 29. We started pedaling uphill and uphill and uphill. Well, would have been really miserable if we weren't on e-bikes.
Oh, no, it is. I've done it not on an e-bike. It's plenty miserable.
It was still a little miserable, but hey. So the MX really might have been just a little bit quicker to get up to speed. Again, smaller wheel is going to accelerate faster, bigger wheel, just a little bit slower. It's not something that we really thought of before, but something that became slightly apparent. And again, this isn't like night and day differences, but...
Yeah, it was really subtle, but I think it was a bigger difference on really steep stuff. Rather than like the flat rolling where you're kind of up to speed, it was getting up to speed where it was kind of noticeable.
So again, this is something else that's a little more noticeable on the really steep stuff, but there was a little better traction on the 29. You know, it really felt like you had a little bit more tire on the ground. It was sticking to the ground just a little bit better. And then it also, when it got really steep, you could feel that wheel was back just a little farther, and it was easier to keep the front wheel of the bike down better.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest things I noticed on the climbs is on the really steep stuff, the 29 felt more balanced. And granted, I'm tall and I ride an extra large frame, so I generally prefer a little bit longer chainstay than someone who's on a medium or a small. So I felt like the 29er was more balanced, especially for my frame size. I wasn't falling off the back of the bike as much, which led to a better climbing position. On the flat ground, it really wasn't a big deal.
Yeah,
it was
not
just
very
when it got
noticeable at
really
all.
steep. And our climbs got plenty steep. And just to reinforce what Zach said, I really do think there is something with the MX accelerating quicker. You've got the same amount of torque and power from the motor, but a smaller wheel to drive. So I think there's something to that. He was pulling away from me on the MX, and then when I was on that bike, I was kind of pulling away from him.
Yeah, again, not this huge difference, but noticeable.
Just enough to be annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so jumping into downhill performance, this is where I feel like the differences were bigger, or there were more differences between them. My first lap on our downhill track was on the MX version, and I felt like the bike was really easy to initiate a corner or to start changing lines, kind of push that back wheel out into a corner, and it just felt a little more agile and nimble. I don't feel like it was slower or getting hung up or couldn't hang with the 29er at all.
Kind of the feel and the word to me is it felt tighter.
Okay.
Like it felt to me like when we were like really getting into a corner hard, and I mean this is literally me like the whole time trying to keep up to Connor, but it was just a little tighter, a little bit sharper, but it doesn't mean faster. It was just
Quicker maybe, not faster.
Yeah.
And then we jumped in on our second lap and we had swapped bikes, so I was on the 29 at this point, and the bike felt a lot more stable. And that was the very first thing I noticed was the stability. There was a lot more of it. I'm gonna guess most of that comes from the longer rear center on the bike. There was a lot more stability, and because of it, I think there was a lot better traction. There were a couple places on our trail where it just gets so steep, you're trying to slow down and you've got the brakes like full pull, but you're still accelerating. It's kind of a scary feeling. On the 29, I was able to just heels down, dig in, and actually slow down a little bit better. I don't know if it's just the bigger contact patch on the 29-inch wheel, or if it's the longer bike and more balanced riding position for me, but there was a lot more traction.
If I had to say, I'm leaning towards contact patch. There's a spot on our ride that, I mean, we just did steep, and then you get to this...
To steeper.
Yeah, to steeper. But then you got to slow down, and this just really tight kind of S-turn between some rocks and everything. My first lap was on the 29. I got it, but I had to really exaggerate the corner.
Yep.
On the MX, on the next one, you know, I was really just kind of able to pin that a little better. And I mean, subtle differences again, but differences. So we both finished up the test and had our favorites. And this isn't just, oh, well, we got to pick one of each to be fair. This is like truly we both had a favorite on this. My favorite was the MX, which is surprising because I am normally the 29er guy. Like, I haven't ridden 27.5 much in a long time. Man, for me, for my riding style, which is a little slower than Connor's, I think a little more average trail than Connor's, like he always complains if I take him on anything that's just a good pedal. It was tighter, it was sharper, I enjoyed it. I felt like I could initiate turns a little bit better. For me, that just kind of worked out well.
I was actually really surprised to see the bikes we each picked because you are wheels on the ground, go fast guy, and I goof around on the bike just a little bit more. But, you know, for me, I have to pick that 29er. I think the extra stability at speed especially, and the extra traction just about everywhere, I'll take that all day. I generally tend to ride steeper, looser, rockier trails, and the more traction I can get, the better. So for me, it's the 29.
I really enjoy steeper, looser stuff, and usually when Connor and I ride together, that's what we're riding. But I'm riding every day just on regular trails, and that MX was nice. Just nice for my riding style.
All right, so we're going to try to maybe help you pick the one you should buy. I think if you are riding every day, a little bit mellower trails, you aren't always on the steepest terrain, maybe the negatives or the slight drawbacks to the MX aren't going to be as apparent or noticeable to you. You're not going to feel like you're going out the back on really steep climbs. You're not going to feel like you're missing a little bit of traction. I think you'll actually benefit more from the little bit snappier, quicker handling bike, and potentially it's a faster accelerating bike as well.
And if you're more the type like Connor, who is using this e-bike as an adventure tool to get up and just get into some stuff that you would never ride otherwise, steep, up and down, you know, the 29er does have its benefits there.
I do feel like it's a little bit more balanced ride position, and again, more traction, more stability. I do want to reiterate, it's not like these are at both ends of those spectrums, like traction to no traction. They're all here, and they're like right next to each other.
Well, and these are the same bike.
Yeah,
I mean, they are. You can tell it's still that same fun, poppy, playful, just amazing e-bike. With the way things are right now, and as hard as it is to get bikes, I wouldn't let being hung up on 29er or MX be what stops me from picking up a bike. Like if I walked into my local shop and I saw a 29er there and I was like, kind of lean an MX, I'm snagging that 29er because that bike is so good, and I'd rather be riding the bike than waiting forever.
They're not different enough to beat yourself up over the decision that much. Again, differences are really, really slight. So hopefully that helps you decide if the MX or the 29 is better for you. Thanks for sticking around. We'll see you next time.